All right, welcome to another deep dive. You guys really threw us a curveball this time.
Definitely a fascinating one, though.
Yeah, excerpts from Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, huh? We've got the preface, a few earlier bits, and then chapters 11 through 20. Looks like we're really going to be getting into some of the big ideas here.
For sure. I mean, art, morality, influence, the choices we make, it's all there.
Plus, Dorian Gray's story is just captivating even all these years later. And starting with that preface, I think it really sets the stage for everything that comes after. Like, it's almost Wilde giving us a sneak peek behind the curtain of how he thinks about art before we even meet Dorian.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like a set of keys to understanding his whole artistic vision.
Okay, so let's try those keys out. Right off the bat, he says, the artist is the creator of beautiful things. To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim. Kind of a paradox, right? Create something beautiful, but then, step back and let it speak for itself.
Exactly. It's about the work being the focus, not the artist's personality or intentions.
So the art should stand alone, speak for itself.
Right. And then, the critic's role, according to Wilde, is to translate their impression of these beautiful things. But then, and this is where it gets interesting, he says both the highest and lowest forms of criticism are a form of autobiography.
Wait, so when I'm gushing over a painting or hating on a song, I'm actually saying more about me than the art.
Pretty much. That's what he's getting at. It's not about some objective quality of the art. It's all about our subjective experience, our personal baggage we bring to it. So in a way, it challenges the whole idea of critics being authorities.
Huh. Well, that's a thought. And then he talks about the morality of art, and this is where Wilde really throws down the gauntlet. He says the morality of art lies in the perfect use of an imperfect medium. And then, boom, artists have no ethical sympathies, he says. Any hint of sympathy is just a stylistic choice.
You can practically hear the Victorian curl clutching, right? It was a complete rejection of the idea that art had to be morally uplifting or serve some social purpose.
Oh, absolutely. Art for art's sake, loud and clear. Then there's this line that I always find so intriguing. All art is at once surface and symbol. So, there's more than meets the eye with any piece of art.
Exactly. Think about a portrait, right? On the surface, it's just a face, maybe a beautiful one. But the way the artist uses light and shadow, the colors, even the pose, it all could be hinting at something deeper. Maybe the subject's inner life, societal commentary, who knows?
So you're saying there's always more to uncover, but we shouldn't get too hung up on deciphering every little thing. Just appreciate the beauty, too.
Yeah, he actually says those who look too deep do so at their peril. It's like he's acknowledging that art has a kind of inherent mystery that shouldn't be totally dissected.
Makes sense. And then that final punchline of the preface, I love this one. It is the spectator and not life that art really mirrors. So again, it all comes back to us how we perceive and interpret things.
Right. It sets us up perfectly for entering Dorian Gray's world. So from those pretty revolutionary ideas about art, we zoom in on Basil Hallward's studio, right? There's Basil, the artist, Lord Henry, the witty cynic, and then, of course, the stunningly handsome Dorian Gray himself.
And right away, you see this clash between how Basil and Lord Henry view Dorian. Basil's completely smitten, almost obsessed. He thinks Dorian's, essential to his art, that he can't even paint properly without him around. I mean, doesn't that go against Wilde's whole conceal the artist thing? He's putting so much of himself, his feelings, into this portrait of Dorian.
It's true. It's like his feelings for Dorian are becoming part of the art. But maybe you could argue that by painting Dorian's beauty so perfectly, he's still revealing something profound, even if it's not explicitly about himself.
I like that. And then there's Lord Henry always dropping these little warm shells of cynicism. He even says that all influence is immoral, because you're basically giving away a piece of your soul.
And he's already planting those seeds of hedonism in Dorian's mind, encouraging him to indulge in pleasure and beauty while he's still young. Plus, he's super curious about why Basil won't exhibit the portrait.
Which leads to Basil spilling his guts, right? He's reluctant at first, but he basically admits he put way too much of himself into the painting. He's almost worshiping Dorian, and he's terrified that the portrait reveals his own soul.
It's a really vulnerable moment, and it shows just how blurred the lines are between artist and subject, like we talked about with the preface. And poor Dorian, he's soaking all this in, all these ideas about beauty and youth and the fleeting nature of time.
Yeah, and with Lord Henry whispering in his ear about seizing the day, no wonder he makes that impulsive wish, that the portrait would age instead of him so he could stay young and beautiful forever.
It's vanity, sure, but I think there's also a deeper fear there. The fear of aging, of losing your looks, your vitality, especially in Victorian society where appearances were everything. It's like Wilde's tapping into a universal human anxiety about mortality.
Totally. And from that wish, the whole story just takes off. And you really see Lord Henry step into this role of like Dorian's mentor in hedonism.
Yeah, he's shaping Dorian's worldview, pushing him further down this path of pleasure-seeking. And we also learn about Dorian's background, which is actually pretty tragic. His mom ran off with someone else. His dad died in a duel. He had a lonely childhood.
Which maybe explains why he's so susceptible to Lord Henry's influence. He's looking for something, some kind of excitement.
Right, and that search leads him to Sybil Vane, the actress. He finds her in this kind of rundown theater, and he's completely captivated by her performances.
He's totally idealizing her, seeing her as these characters she plays. And Basil's worried, of course. He doesn't trust Lord Henry's influence, but he thinks maybe falling in love with Sybil will be a good thing for Dorian, maybe lead to marriage and stability.
But Lord Henry just laughs at that. Marriage, love, constancy. Totally overrated, he says. He sees them all as illusions that eventually fade. Which, looking back, is pretty ominous foreshadowing.
Oh, for sure. And then comes that disastrous performance of Romeo and Juliet. Sybil's acting is terrible because she's actually fallen in love with Dorian in real life, not just pretending on the gate.
And Dorian, he's so wrapped up in this aesthetic ideal of her. He's furious. He wants the art, not the messy reality of human emotions. It's like he's forgetting everything Wilde said about beauty being more than just the surface.
Yeah, and this is where we see the first sign of the portrait changing. Dorian goes home after rejecting Sybil, and boom, the portrait now has this cruel sneer on its face.
It's like a physical manifestation of his conscience, right? Every bad decision, every cruel act, it leaves a mark on the portrait, but not on him.
Right, and then the news hits that Sybil's killed herself. You'd think Dorian would be devastated, racked with guilt, but he just follows Lord Henry's advice, treats it as another experience, another sensation, and focuses on preserving his own beauty.
He even hides the portrait away like he's trying to hide the evidence of his own corruption, both from the world and from himself.
And from there, he just spirals further down this dark path. He starts indulging in all sorts of sensual pleasures, morally questionable stuff. There's even that mention of a book, supposedly based on a real one, that completely poisons his mind.
Right, all about aestheticism and excess. And the contrast gets more and more extreme. He still looks young and innocent, but there are all these whispers about his depravity, about how he ruins everyone he touches.
Which lead to Basil finally confronting him. He's heard the rumors, he's worried soon, and he begs Dorian to just deny everything, to let him see his soul so he can defend him.
And in a moment of panic, maybe even arrogance, Dorian makes the huge mistake of showing Basil the portrait.
What a scene that must have been. Basil sees this grotesque, monstrous image, the true reflection of Dorian's soul. And he's horrified. He realizes the truth about Dorian, and he calls him out on it.
And Dorian just snaps. He kills Basil with the very knife Basil gave him, no less. It's like the ultimate betrayal, and it shows just how far gone Dorian is.
And then it gets even colder. He doesn't even freak out. He just starts plotting to cover up the murder. He blackmails his old friend, this scientist named Alan Campbell, into helping him dispose of the body.
It's just ruthless. And poor Campbell, he's horrified, but he's trapped. It really shows the isolating power of Dorian's secrets, how he pulls others into his web of darkness.
And yet somehow Dorian tries to just go on with his life. He goes to parties, pretends everything's fine, but he can't escape his past entirely. Sybil's brother, James, shows up looking for revenge.
James becomes this constant threat, a reminder that the past always catches up with you. And there's that one scene, years later, where James actually recognizes Dorian, even though he hasn't aged a day. It's so creepy, like something out of a nightmare.
I know. It gives me chills just thinking about it. And then there's that hunting accident, which really shakes Dorian up.
Right. A man gets accidentally shot. Dorian sees it as a bad omen. Maybe it triggers some guilt, some awareness of the violence he's brought into the world.
Yeah, and he tries to do a good deed to redeem himself somehow. He decides not to seduce this young girl, thinks it'll make the portrait less hideous.
But it doesn't work. The portrait stays the same, and Dorian realizes he wasn't really being selfless at all. He just wanted to see the portrait change, to prove to himself that he was still capable of good.
So he's stuck. The portrait's this constant reminder of everything he's done, and it's driving him crazy. In a final act of desperation, he grabs the knife, the same one he used to kill Basil, and stabs the portrait.
And that's the end, right? The servants find Dorian dead, his body finally aged and withered, the knife in his heart, and the portrait back to its original beauty like nothing ever happened.
It's a powerful ending, and I think it really hammers home Wilde's point about the consequences of our choices. You can't escape who you are no matter how hard you try to hide it.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about influence, too. How the people we surround ourselves with, the ideas we let in, they can shape us in profound ways.
And for all Wilde's talk about art for art's sake, the novel itself is a pretty strong indictment of a life lived purely for pleasure. Dorian's pursuit of beauty and sensation leads him to some pretty ugly places.
It's a reminder that true beauty might not be about outward appearances, but about the choices we make, how we treat others.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's a good time to ask ourselves some tough questions. What influences are shaping our lives? What are the unseen portraits that reflect our actions, our choices? And ultimately, what kind of beauty are we chasing? The fleeting kind or something deeper and more lasting?
Heavy stuff, but definitely worth pondering. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.